This is the Construction IT Alliance Tech Trends Series 2022. This is the fourth of 6 events that we're holding this year. And this afternoon's presentation is focusing on quality inspection made easy through digital. I'd like to just start by thanking our sponsors, Arup, Diatech, Cedibri, Symmetry, Linesight, the Fifth Dimension, and of course, the support we constantly get from the Construction IT Alliance SkillNet network. So we might just have a look at our program. But before we look at our program in detail, I'd just like to make many of you aware that I suppose quality has been in focus, particularly in recent days in Ireland, in respect to the proposed levy in proposed levy on concrete blocks, I suppose, to help fund the mica and pyrite redress scheme. And indeed, there has been other sort of quality news items in construction. And of course, this is also this is something which is of particular importance in the United Kingdom. And delighted to see Daria Braham from King's College London joining us today, who speak more about the Golden Thread initiative there. But so our 3 speakers this afternoon is Daria Braham, who has many roles to play, Vice Chair of the Radcliffe Housing and Association. She's also a professional appointment advisor for Accel Architecture, and also currently a research assistant in King's College in London, actually a former college that I attended many years ago when I studied there. We're also joined, you're very welcome, Daria, to our webinar this afternoon. We also have Kieran Brennan, founder of Ciron IT, and also managing director. And also we'll be joined a little later by Jonathan Reinhardt from Diatech, who will be speaking, who's an Autodesk technical consultant. So I might just have a look at the program. So as I say, I'm your chair this afternoon, and Daria will be talking about the golden thread of digital information, essential enablers. I know we spoke about that at our own event earlier this summer at the CETA Tech Live Summit. I know a colleague of Daria's spoke there, Paolo Gianni as well. So Kieran will be talking about delivering best construction quality outcomes through their quality solution, Quality BIQ. And Jonathan will be talking about how I suppose the Autodesk applications will help support quality through cloud solutions in construction. So it's critically important in this new age of transparency and accountability in our industry that we have, prompt, reliable, transparent information that leads to, I suppose, smarter but safer buildings in the future, yeah? So I'm going to hand you over now to our first speaker. Daria, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
So if you'd like to share your screen with us when you get a chance, yeah.
It's coming a bit slow, but it's
that's fine.
It's right. It has finally arrived, as they say. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be with you. I thought just a quick introduction, which I think Alan has nicely basically done for you. As I said, it's a vice chair of Radcliffe, research associate at the Centre of Construction Law at King's, and of course, professional appointment advisor at the award-winning Accel Architecture and Urban Planning. I have my Centre of Construction Law cap, actually. That's how I was approached by Alan. And so hence, I think it might be an idea to just give you a bit of an idea of what we get up to, and quite a bit, if I may say so. Our expertise are really in construction procurement and contracting. We feel that we are able to create basically innovative ideas and applications that sort of really helps what appears to be complex ideas into kind of processes that the industry could actually not only understand, but hopefully adopt. We've done a large number of work commissioned by the various government departments, the construction industry, and of course, the sort of digital technology side, CDBB and CIH. We produced a white paper that was actually delivered. Again, I can actually send Alan the link to all of these things for the audience later, so they can actually guide through it. We've also published a contract which works in line with the ISO 19650, which you're all very familiar. I'll go into more detail about the importance of that and the, as part of the Golden Thread Enabler. We've produced 2 standard forms of alliance contract for use in procurements for offsite manufacturing and building what we call as smart construction for BIS and CLC. We've recently completed for the DLUHC unfortunate after the unfortunate post-Grenville disaster, a guidance to basically change to how we see that changing the procurement, hence building safer homes. I'll touch on that again. As part of my sort of King's Centre of Construction Law CAP, I've also produced 2 e-learning modules. If you're actually interested in basically performance through procurement, collaborative procurement, how procurement and contracting can make a difference as you go through your projects or program of work. I kind of, there are 3 40-minute basically webinars that you might find of interest. Also, the independent review of public sector construction framework, which Professor David Mosley, that headed the centre, actually was approached by Lord Agnew from the Cabinet Office. One other that I haven't gone through is we've produced a recent paper for Society of Construction Law on procuring for net zero carbon. I think that's quite topical. Again, I'll send through Alan the link if you'd be interested to actually have a read of that. So it's only appropriate to start setting the scene before giving you some, convincing factors on what are the enablers, and sort of a whole series of those are required, to be honest, to be able to actually adopt and implement. Actually, we're doing that at the moment at the Cell Architecture. So the backdrop is that we are told that we have an industry that is manufacturing industry. Well, if that's the case, yes. We've got a process of moving, assembling all sorts of, materials and equipment, and we build something at the end of that. But unfortunately, it's slightly different from that, isn't it? Because we actually build prototypes each and every time, and we really rely heavily on the coordinated effort of a whole diverse network of people, products, services, and works, and a huge number of interconnected delivery and payment processes. So it's a complex issue. We need to find ways of actually simplifying that so we can actually focus for the same goal. So that's actually important. So building a safer future. You all are familiar with the fact that we've got new legislation, quite stringent, that actually does condemn the way we actually work and calls for change, demands for safer homes for people, and it's really not much to ask. And as part of that, there are very strict safety compliance that really the build form needs to go through to get that. So what it's trying to do is trying to find a way of identifying, managing, and mitigating the type of risk associated with fire and structural collapse. So that's sort of the essence of it. For those of you who have heard Golden Thread of Information, however, have been wondering what it actually is, just briefly, it is what it says on the tin. It's information. It's information about a building, but it's an up-to-date information, and the journey past that actually has made it arrive to that point. Remember what I said about assembling products and materials? Well, it's literally that. And also, it's not only that, it's about the management of information, because the building gets refurbished, things happen to it. So basically, it's actually a story of that building captured in total sense. So It's a no-brainer that, to be honest, to be able to produce and adopt something that requires you to capture and retain that level of information, up-to-date information, you needed an integrated approach. You need a collaborative approach. I mean, they're no-brainers. And we've got now technology that you will hear with sort of the other two speakers that is here, and BIM naturally being the one that we've now started to adopt and use, that allows us to actually produce more accurate and efficient data. But really, to be honest, I think what's actually really quite important, that we really need to remember right at the outset, condemning, current working. We need to change in mindset, change in culture. So procurement and contracting come into play as a very important element, to be honest. You all know that, as I said, when you actually choose your procurement, you seal your fate of how the project will go forward and how relationships will be set. So we need to build a type of relationships that could actually work in a culture. You're not, and I'm sure that you will kind of agree that collaboration is not just a word or a sentence or basically some form of a sort of a page that you actually put down and everyone signs to and say, well, now we've got to go ahead and do that. How often that happens and everyone runs towards their contracts when things go wrong. We need to change mindset. There's no point unfairly pushing down risk down the supply chain, really unfairly. If you don't know it, well, push it down and at least somebody else has to worry about it. We need to start thinking about more network structure. Remember, we're working with technology and network structure, and because we do need information, we do need it earlier. And now, especially with the Building Safety Act, we do need it really much earlier than we would have originally planned in our program of work, whatever basically a role you have in the overall process. And the reason why I say that is a good example here. I picked this up from a presentation many years ago. You can see how contractually orientated we are, which is everybody wants to have a contractual relationship with everybody else because they want to protect themselves. Well, that's going to be someone they could actually go for and sue and hold liable. And I think that's actually not the way to go forward. It's been said, but I think it's just not sustainable any longer. So if you think about it, I suppose a collaborative procurement and digital technology both pursue the same goal, in a sense that you're sort of creating and exchanging information, and you're doing it at a time that's most useful to deliver the outcome you want, be it through the gateways, be it compiling a sort of information for a particular trade and so on. And as a result, you actually improve value and hopefully reduce risk. But it's important to remember that we need to kind of make sure that this information that you're producing, it's actually relevant to the project. And you need to be able to put aside the divided commercial interest for the same common goal of actually achieving right end results is good for all of us if we do, when we do. So ISO 19650 has been very useful. It's about the production and how you manage information. And it actually does help in terms of setting up processes. But what is actually, it really needs, and I'll go through later, is you need to get a much tighter way of creating interfaces in integration of the team, right across the board for the project to be able to work better. So as you can see, I'm leading up to the fact that procurement and contracting are very important. Contracts are really needed to create even that collaborative environment. It's not going to happen with that sheet of paper I showed you. So you do need to have, sort of clarity as to who does what. You need to be able to engage and bring on board the supply chain and the experience and the knowledge they have into developing that scheme as early as it's required, especially now that a lot more earlier information is required before you could actually go through the various gateways of the Building Safety Act. And more importantly, it's important to have and bring on board and have them engaged as kind of end users and stakeholders. So I'm now moving you towards an idea of the need for some form of a multi-party contract. And I don't mean, and I'm going to stop you there because I know you're thinking, I'm not thinking about the fact that you're actually losing your individual contracts with your client, with the subcontractor, with the contractor, and so on. What I'm saying is that create an umbrella contract above all of that, that actually purely works for interfaces and integration and supporting basically relationships. So it's this direct contractual relationship that you have with the other person in the team that you're working in. And if everybody already has got this contractual relationship and it's clear that who does what, then the liability for that each individual will be limited, because it's possible to identify who does what when, because it's what we've been collectively agreeing. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that there's a need to create an information management contract, a kind of integrated information management, which works along the processes and that is actually been put through 19650, and that would mean that it helps enable and encourage the use of BIM, and it should be able to be a kind of a contract that sort of not only brings the team together, but also is able to kind of collectively capture lessons learned or ideas from each other, so that we could actually raise threshold, and that raised standard could actually then be the standard that we could raise threshold from. How powerful that can be. And also, we're able to share right information at the right time, all of that sort of embedded into a kind of contract. And as I've mentioned earlier, although you're talking about efficient working, you're also creating clear legal rights and obligations as a result of that. So we've got ISO that stresses on collaboration. It says it's pivotal to efficient delivery and operation of assets. Now, the integrated information management contract that I sort of mentioned earlier, that we've actually produced at the centre, and it's actually in use by, as I said, Ministry of Justice quite extensively for a number of years, and other Crown Commercial Services clients. It does provide for kind of agreeing deadlines, how the gateways would work, the interfaces of the parties within a kind of a share and collectively produced timetable within it. And also it allows for the contribution of specialists, because we do need, each of those are specialists in a certain area, and it's good to be able to bring them on board, and you can add them in under that umbrella, what we call as a supply chain collaboration. It actually this contract makes it clear how the basically IP rights work in relation to the team that work under that umbrella. And of course, it also has sort of clash resolution, ideas of early warning, and what we call as core group, where individual representatives from each party under the umbrella comes together if there is a potential disagreement, that it could be discussed and hopefully resolved before it actually creates a dispute So I think that's actually very powerful. And it does actually create this transparency and more of a collaborative working. Okay, so now you see on the screen the IIMC basically contract. It is possible, if you want, through me to get a copy and how it works, because we have the clauses of the ISO 1965 are embedded into where it fits into this contract. And of course, one has to remember this is the one we delivered for the post-Grenfell, actually, for the Department of Levelling Up. And they also basically encourage the adoption of collaborative procurement and contracting to be able to have them as key enablers to move forward for creating safer homes. And remember that both of those have actually now been mentioned in the new construction playbook revision that's come out this month, actually. So very quickly, as I'm wary of time, is that so through the basically IMC, we've got basically an important enabler, and we've seen some of the reasons why. I've started with the idea of moving away from defensive and fragmented culture. Well, this will create that under its sort of that umbrella I was telling you about. It improves integration, and that's very important if you need to be able to provide that level of information by the right people to and capture and retain it going forward. It does involve users and stakeholders. They actually have a place in terms of being named in the contract, which is also, as I said, the requirement under the Building Safety Act. It actually improves and connects actually the capital and operational works, and that's what you need with the golden thread. It doesn't, the information doesn't end at the end of a new build. It has a lifespan and things happen to the building. So what you do during the maintaining it is also very important. So it is possible to have that kind of linkage between the two through the IIMC. It actually provides a motivation for everyone to come together, and as I've mentioned before, it creates that very clear legal rights and obligation that's basically required. I think just in time, actually, I have to say. So I think silo working is out of the window. I hope you agree with that. We need to change the culture, but we do need formal mechanisms, even for collaboration, to sit under kind of a formal contract that could actually encourage that. But that contract needs to be multi-party. Again, as I said, it'll be an umbrella and not a replacement to your JCT, NEC, or your professional services appointment. So we need to change, we need to work to be able to commonly interface and create collaborative relationship. It's something that we need to do to store, manage, and maintain and retain information, all in line with what is required from the golden thread of information, which is a requirement now under the new Building Safety Act. Thank you very much for listening. As I said, you can get in touch with me through Alan. And what I'll also do is send you information and a linkage on all of those reports that we've actually recently produced.
Thank you very much, Daria. And I actually put in a link to the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I was only in a meeting last Tuesday with our digital procurement team of Build Digital, and I mentioned it, and I too sat a number of modules and got a certificate in regard to performance through procurement. So a great resource, and I put the link in the chat. And thanks so much. I know you have to run, so we're going to maybe have some questions now.
Yes, of course.
Just one thing struck out to me there was the contract encourages the use of BIM, but is that really strong enough? Should the contract not require the use of BIM? I mean,
I think, to be honest, what you have to remember that where the journey we've sort of hopefully started and moving forward requires you to embed the technology, and it won't be able to happen because you need that for efficient production of data, and you'll see that hopefully with the subsequent speakers and so on. So it encourages, in a sense, that there basically ISO puts in place processes and sort of certain path for the adoption and management of information. And what this contract does is actually utilizes that and puts it in a format that will help everyone embed and agree on. I think if I could turn around and tell you, okay, Alan, I want you to come in on this project and I want you to do specifically these things. But if I turn around and say, Alan, we're actually looking towards actually working on this project, and we want you to help us build basically a better picture of what needs to happen. And so would you work better under something that you've been involved in from day one, or are you happy to be told this is what you need to do? And okay, I'll just get on and do it. So the idea is just literally as simple as that. You're actually, what you're doing is you're facilitating a forum where you're actually engaging people early. We've had successes under the IIMC where we've had longer warranties by subcontractors because they were involved early in the decision process, because they had an input in the design and they've seen. So, in this day and age, do you really get that sort of thing? And we have, and this is
so I guess we get to understand more about what the contractual requirements are under, say, JCT or NEC. Then we have the FAC over umbrella document. Then we have what we heard about in recent weeks about this information management framework that's going to replace the 2016 government mandate, and then we have the Act, the Safety Act. So, I mean, is this all pointing towards a disruptive future, but a complete cultural change in the mindset of contractors and their supply chains, in that they must demonstrably show that they are, the constructors must demonstrably show that they have built that facility correctly to the standards required in order that the building is safe. And if they do not, they will be held criminally responsible.
Yes, no, absolutely, absolutely. So I think, to be honest, what I'm saying is that you're able to basically come together, collectively compile the information, because for those that are contractors and in construction generally are, you'll notice that there under the new Building Safety Act, basically what happens is that you require to provide information, and very, very much more detailed than previously before you're allowed to onto site. Whereas so gone those days where you said, well, let's get onto site and we'll figure out what this and that and the other is while they're working on that corner. Or
I'm just conscious of the time. I just want to allow the audience to come in if they have any questions, because I know you need to get away and we have two other speakers, and I think you did a great job. And I think the fact that we've recorded that, people will have a better understanding of the golden set. Do we have any questions from the audience, either in the chat or people want to come in on their mics? No questions for Daria?
Speechless, but I'm sure if you think about anything, I'm sure you'll let Alan know. But as I said, I think it'll be really useful to have, for you to have those links to just sort of digest even more before you ask those questions. So
thank you very much. And if you're happy to stay with us for a few more minutes, you're welcome to do so.
Yes, I will actually, for a bit longer.
So now we'll go to, and thank you so much. We're going to go now to Kieran. And this really is, I suppose, a product, an innovative technological product, which is in the market for a number of years. Isn't that right, Kieran?
Well, not so much a product, Alan, more
a
process.
Yeah, a process, yeah.
More process. Products I suppose where we look at this from a product perspective, it fits to multiple products. It's more of a process of how we approach, and we're coming at from a commissioning perspective.
Okay, thanks very much. If you'd like to, maybe can you put your presentation on full presentation mode, or you can leave it even in that mode.
Can you see it? You can see it there.
Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay, so just give you a little bit of background on who we are. We're Caron Innovative Technologies. We were founded in 2010. We're a construction support company specializing in construction quality and commissioning services, utilizing a project pull methodology, and that's kind of what we'll be talking about today. We've currently 67 workforce, and we serve as a pharmaceutical, semiconductor, mission critical data center type construction industry. So it's a wide range of offerings here. I suppose the top piece here, it's no longer acceptable to think of quality as merely meeting the technical and performance specification in the contract. That will lead to mediocrity, and we can certainly stand over that from some of the projects that we've seen down through the years. Basically, I think we'll move to the next slide. It kind of gives us, tells us kind of the approach that we take. Well, we deliver a built-in quality program here for major construction delivery programs for mission critical operations, deploying proven systems and processes for high-tech electronic data centers and life sciences. Our integrated project approach drives us towards target zero defects, and this is through a series of processes that we integrate from the outset, from design, and we'll go through that in the next couple of slides. I realize I have a lot of slides here, so I need to get through them fairly quickly, and if anybody has any questions, just stop me as we go along. The process we've developed is applied to offsite manufacturing, on-site activities, and we concentrate on delivering effective leveraging opportunities. And we'll speak a little bit about that later on, and multi-use solution by creating a digital thread. So we have some statistics in here, the cost of commissioning, and the cost of commissioning on a particular project is directly affected by the quality delivery within that project. So we estimate the cost of commissioning and construction is about 2.5%. 2% to 5% of the construction cost spent on remedying defects and getting it right. In an industry where wafer tin net profits margins of 1% to 3%, improving quality and customer satisfaction should prove high priority. So when we talk about quality and commissioning, it's not standalone. We talked about it involves all aspects and all people that are involved from the outset to make construction quality work and commissioning work at the back end. So what we try to do is integrate quality and turnover commissioning through the digital thread. We work with design and the outputs in real time. This is really important for us. If we don't get the outputs from design correct from the very beginning, it leads to lots of issues in the back end, particularly around control of documentation, and being able to commission the equipment at the right time, and with the right processes in place to be able to deliver that commissioning on time. We utilize schedules and scopes of works to deliver milestones. We'll talk a little bit about that. We remotely assign tags, predecessors. We develop the right required documentation from the very beginning, and we can set these up to work either from a remote location or on-site, but all of what we do is set up digitally, so that we remove error from the outset, and that we can use the data that we're collecting in a meaningful way to make informed decisions around quality. We work with our suppliers and contracts at the very early stages by on the handover documentation, by provision of training. So this is really important to us, and it's also important that these requirements are written into contracts, so that people are very aware from the very outset of what their expectations are with regard to documentation and delivery during the project phase. And we develop a project pull system-based approach to schedule, and we'll talk a little bit about that, called SSMs. So we talk about zero defects. Zero defects are so critical for us. If we don't get the systems handed to us in the various different stages with out defects, and we don't just mean defects by the actual construction itself. We also mean it by documentation. We work in a very controlled and environment, particularly in the pharmaceutical and semiconductor world, where we need to ensure that what we do is also replicated and recorded and documented along the way. And defects, even in that documentation, can cause us quite a number of problems when we go to hand over to the client. So the key elements to successful delivery is obviously our commissioning plan in the middle, how that plan works, looking at the vendor documentation, feeding that commissioning plan back out at the very beginning to define the project supporting documentation. We put in field commissioning documentation, project metadata we'll talk a little bit about, and again we'll talk a little bit about system startup matrix. So what are the requirements? When we go to commission, these are the list of requirements that we would need from the very beginning to ensure that we are going to get all of the systems across the line by ensuring that all the documentation and all the activities associated with these are captured on a digital format with zero defects along the way. So we do this by looking at milestone deliveries, and that milestone delivery can be made up of many different aspects. It could be an area handover, it could be a date handover, but what we do here is we defined what that milestone is and what we need from the outset to achieve that milestone with regard to installation quality, documentation quality, the actual checklist that need to be provided, and that goes right across the board from both the suppliers, the contractors, and the commissioning agents, the quality inspectors. All of those need to be aligned to drive towards that milestone. And then once we reach that milestone, those systems that we have defined, we gather that data digitally and hand it to the client and say we're ready to operate this and maintain this part of the project at that particular time. So the commissioning plan is documented, used to outline the scope and define the responsibility of the commissioning process. So this is really critical. Again, all digitally, all paperwork managed digitally right throughout the process. It also identifies the commissioning team members and their roles and responsibilities, the tasks that need to be completed, the documentation need to be delivered, and the sequence of which we need to do it. And also, of course, critically, the schedule. So the simplified software roadmap is we define the milestone, we look at the master equipment list, we look at the drawings, we take that into the various different activities then, like are the test packs that are required to deliver the individual piece of equipment in place, are they digital, are they fit for purpose, and are they consistent across the board? So we could have multiple contractors working on pieces of equipment. We need to ensure that all the test packs that we're getting from them are all consistent across the board. That any checklists we put in place are correct, that we have a handover sequence, and then we create what we call a system startup management plan. And we'll go into that a little bit more. We then do the commissioning, and then we hand over to the client. All of that is digitally controlled, managed and set up as a process from the outset using the digital software. In one of the jobs we're using at the moment, we're working on at the moment, which we are a client representative, we have over 100,000 pieces of equipment. So managing that from the outset is to have a process and a system in place that's clearly defined and clearly managed with inputs from everybody. Is absolutely critical. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to deliver that project. So we have a list of desired deliverables that we need to get from the outset. We don't need to go into these into detail, but this is kind of the types of systems that we would need to be looking at for within the system so that we can get a handover clean to the client. So we need to drive the automation of project documentation from the outset to ensure that once we get to the back end, the paperwork is clean, and we front load all of these systems to standardize the progressive review of documentations so that we can certify at every step in real time and remove any lengthy costly review periods. What it also allows us to do is when you have the documentation in and it's verified at the various different stages, we can leverage the later stages. Like in pharmaceutical, we can leverage the validation stage earlier in the construction project. So the validation people can come in, validate that the paperwork is correct, so that it eliminates one of their steps earlier in the process. So once we get this right, there are not just the benefits of making sure that quality is correct, but also allows the project to be more efficient in the way it approaches and allows leveraging of other activities. So from a design input, then we have a list of things that we need to have in place. So this is kind of like a contractual agreement. And I know Darius spoke a little bit about that, is agreeing internal contractual agreements of what is required from the various different stages of the project. So from a design input perspective, these are the list of contractual deliverables that we would need from the design group in order to make our job successful. Then we have vendor inputs, and I suppose this is one of the areas that kind of gets forgotten quite a bit in the projects, to ensure that they're included in the whole process of documentation delivery. We need to fully describe to them how documents will be exchanged, and how that's importable into our software systems, and that we can validate that at a very early stage. And that needs to be done up front. Then the field documentation we need to put in place. So from a contractor's and a main contractor's perspective, we need to ensure that they've got all their documentation, that it's validated within the system, and that there's a schedule of when those documents need to be imported into the system and delivered at the various different stages. And there are gates for when we would allow people to move to the next stage, and we'll talk about it in one of the slides going forward. So project metadata gives a better outcome. So as we identify the systems are identified by the tag numbers. The tag numbers are parent and child related. All the metadata that's associated with those tags, systems, line numbers, whatever way we want to decide that is the more metadata that we have linked to these, the better the outcome for us. It allows us to maintain that digital thread all the way through, and make it fully visible at any particular stage of where we're at with any single piece of equipment. Again, we speak about the vendor and supporting documentation and how that might work, and how project control, change controls need to be implemented, technical submittals need to be there, requests for information need to be fully adhered to, so that we can ensure that what's been installed and what's been supplied is actually what the client has agreed to purchase within that contract. It can become quite complicated where you have multiple choices from a design perspective of what to install, and to ensure that we track that the right piece of equipment has been installed has become very, very critical for us to be able to hand over the piece of equipment at the very end. So we talked a little bit about gate activities. So what we talk about here is when we put together test packs for contractors, that all the documentation is in place, that we have gates here to allow us to stop the future activity happening until we have the proper documentation in place. So effectively what happens is, if the right documentation is not in at any particular stage, you can't open the checklist for the next stage. You need to make sure that it's all verified, signed off and complete. And once you get a green light from that, you're allowed to open the next checklist and proceed to the next stage. So this allows us to build that quality in as we go along, rather than having it as a hard copy that gets uploaded and not reviewed digitally. Once it's digitally reviewed and digitally signed off by the various different owners and stakeholders, then they can proceed to the next stage. And this is a great way of controlling the quality as we go through each step, and it's been used very, very effectively. So once we have all the documentation in place, then we predetermine what the client, from a handover perspective, needs to ensure that they're happy to move to the operational stage. And we predetermine what those handovers are going to be from the very, very outset. So we link all of the tags to the various different pieces of handover documentation, and then that's automatically generated as a handover pack for the client, so that when we get to the various different stages of tagging, that they're not going looking for hard copy pieces of paper. It's all automatically generated and sent to them in an email and sent to their doc control system. The contents of the tags in the handover are agreed during the front loading, and it's identified by both ourselves and the client. And once that's identified, we create a master template with an index on the front of it, and all of that documentation gets passed over once it's fully validated within the system. And we validate as we go along, rather than validate the documentation at the back end, which would have been traditional up to a few years ago. So what's the value add? The value add is, obviously, we talked about leveraging, getting results, save money. The concept of leveraging to take advantage of all resources that are available to achieve new additional objectives. Leveraging should be used to reduce time spent on activities directly in your control, introduce documentation fully completed and verified by third parties, and realign resources to prevent peaks and gates in the process. So what we mean here is, by putting the documentation in early, you're allowed then the next stage to start earlier, to review the documentation, to allow them to move to the next stage in an early review, rather than wait till everything is done and handed over at a particular time. We can, by allowing people to have a digital view of where all the documentation is, we get an earlier start on the next phase of the project. We use a system called the System Startup Metric, which is key to proper turnover. What we do here is we identify the requirements to hand over a single piece of a system. It's quite complex in how we do it. We take a piece of equipment, let's call it an air handling unit, and we identify all its subcomponents that are required to deliver that piece of equipment. And that would be not just from a mechanical perspective, but also from a controls perspective and an electrical perspective as well. And we can split the system startup into multiple phases. We can split it into one startup, or we can split it into multiple startups and then combine it at the very end. This is a very, very effective tool, which allows us to look at each parent and child individually or collectively, and ensure that all of the activities that were required to move that parent or child to the next phase are in place, and it's all available on a digital platform. So this is, I know this is kind of hard to see, but this is a system that contains 16 skids. So if we were to achieve the top piece of this spider, we would need to achieve all 16 skids on the bottom, and all of these are related and interdependent on each other. So if we looked at delivery for one skid, so we take, if we go back to that one, we look at the one on the top, the one on or any one of those, they will break down even further into its deliverables for that individual piece of kit. And by us allowing
Kieran,
us,
can I just ask you there, Kieran, have you many slides left?
I've only three or four more.
Oh yeah, no, we just need to move on to the next one. It's excellent, by the way. Lots of questions coming in.
If we click on any one of those, it will allow us to look at each individual piece of documentation that's required for each of those. And if there's a child related to each one of those, by clicking on that, it will give you the breakdown of the child that's associated with that. So we have a full complex roadmap of how to get to start or hand over a piece of equipment. This allows us to end up getting engineering turnover packs, which are all customizable, signed off by contractors and by the stakeholders. Punch lists are all completed, identification of welders. And we lock these in so that they're not changed. Once they're in the system and signed off, that's it. They're fully locked into the system, and then they go into the handover pack. So there's no attempt even to make an error post equipment being started up.
Okay.
So that's the system that we use. We're looking now, is the future digital twin? We've started very much in the last number of months starting to look at digital twin and integrating our approach into the digital twin process. We've been working on some projects in the Middle East and now starting to work on some project in Europe. And we're asking the question, is digital twin the future for this methodology of completion and tracking of systems?
Okay.
Digitization is playing a significant role in reimagining construction. As a result, the sector is seeking a significant acceleration in technology adaptation, allowing it to leapfrog to more efficient production processes, models and value chains. But the process needs to be developed and good engineering and control practices underpin these. These qualities, can we build in quality from the very beginning? That's the question that ultimately we ask.
Can I just bring that to an end, Kieran? Do you mind?
No, that's not a problem.
It's just that you've done a great job and lots of questions, but Jonathan, I think, was under pressure to get away.
Yep.
And so we were trying to kind of get to a 2 o'clock finish, but so many questions I want to ask as well. So I'm going to go to Jonathan.
Yep.
Jonathan, good afternoon. Sorry for keeping you. And thank you, Kieran, by the way. It was great to see reference to golden and thread. So you could see there was a link back to what Daria was talking about. So there was definitely a linkage there. So on to Jonathan. Jonathan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much, Alan. You can see my screen and hear me,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah.
Brilliant. Good stuff. And thanks very much, Kieran. Very, very interesting stuff. So my name is Jonathan. Just to introduce myself very briefly, I work for Diatech. We're an Autodesk Platinum partner. So just to give you my context, and my background is primarily architecture, but a lot of BIM management and BIM consultancy. So I suppose keeping with the theme of what today is, what I wanted to show you was some of the Autodesk tools that lend themselves quite well to kind of managing quality on site. So some of the cloud-based tools that can support those type of processes and support various different types of businesses, whether you're a design business, main contractor, subcontractor, or client or developer, or owner of building or portfolio of buildings as well. So the product that I want to look at today, or the tool that I want to look at today, is Autodesk Build. I know I've probably shown this before, maybe at a more high level, but what I want to do today is I want to get into the kind of the more technical level of those kind of quality workflows that exist within Autodesk Build. Autodesk Build, just for those that may not be aware, it's part of the Autodesk Construction Cloud. It sits within a web browser, so it's stored in a cloud location. You log in with your email address. I'm logged in here with my Diatech email address, as you can see in the top corner. So I log in through a web browser. I can also use it on a mobile device. That was my phone I held up, hidden my screen. And you can also use it on a mobile device. Obviously, you can use it on site, on iPads then, to capture information, record site information, whether that's commissioning, installation, BCAR, fire protection, door installation, anything that goes with construction or civil engineering related projects. You can use that to manage that entire process to a certain degree within Autodesk Build. So Autodesk Build, if you're familiar with it already, it stores lots of different information. It stores Revit files, CAD files, IFC files, NWC, PDF drawings, everything as a common data environment should do, but it's intended for design and construction information. That's primarily what Autodesk Construction Cloud does. But on top of that, it does quite a lot more as well inside Autodesk Build. So I can go into any of my models here, into my folder structure. I can open up a model. I can navigate around that model, as you're all probably quite familiar. But Autodesk Build does quite an extensive more type of functionality within the platform itself. So I'm able to look at my Revit files, my drawing files, for example. But what I can also do inside Autodesk Build, as you'll notice here, what I can also do is I can go into something called the forms area. But within the forms area, that allows me to create inspection forms that I can use on site. So I can use these forms again for installation or for commissioning or for tracking any sort of quality or health and safety, or any sort of fire protection, fire installation, anything like that. I can essentially build any type of custom form that I want to build within the platform, and I can use that on site. So just to give you an example of what a form looks like, I'm going to open up an example of a window installation form here. So I'll just minimize my Zoom screen, make sure that's not in the way. Perfect. So I have an example of a window installation form here. This was previously completed. There were some photographs taken on site. Very nice building, as you can see. There was some information entered. Very simple form, and somebody put a signature on it as well. As well as this form, there's also associated information with that form. So we have associated information. So we have the unit number, perhaps the house number or the apartment that form is associated with. We also have the window items that are associated with that installation. So we have the asset elements of those as well, which are also stored in the platform separately down here in assets. So even though I'm still within forms, for example, if I click into my assets, for example, click into unit 001, it's going to bring me from that form, and it's going to bring me into that asset item. So an asset within the platform, effectively, an asset can be a space, a zone, a room, anything like that. But it can also be an object. It can be a window or a door, or any sort of construction-related object or installed object, furniture, AHU, anything like that. An asset can be any type of object that you're putting into your finished project effectively. So what that brought me was, it brought me from the forms into assets because I had connected the form to the asset effectively. But what that also allows me to do within the assets environment is it will bring me back to the form if I wish to as well. So I can click into the form from assets and vice versa. So it builds a bi-directional link within the platform. So if I have a form, I only have to connect it in one place to one piece of element or one object or one asset, and then it will automatically associate that on the other side as well. So it's bi-directional in that regard as well. So with this particular unit, I can see the form that I was already in. I can see other related forms for that, of fire safety form, of a door installation form, of a B-car completion form. I even have a Revit file that's related back to that unit. I'm taking it that this is perhaps an individual house or an individual unit in a housing scheme or residential scheme, and I have a series of different associated information with that particular element. So I've got some photographs all related to unit 001. I have a schedule item that's also related to 001. So for example, I'm in this particular asset. What I can now do is I can go into my schedule item. So a schedule item is essentially your construction program. I've put together a B-car inspection schedule as an example, or an inspection schedule. So I'm going to click on that schedule item, and this is going to bring me into the schedule functionality within inside the Autodesk Build platform. And again, what I can see from inside the schedule function, once I get into this in a moment, I can see that bi-directional link is linking me back to that asset, and even back to perhaps the associated forms that are connected to that particular unit as well. So what I've done there is I've jumped from a couple of different areas within the platform, from forms to assets and back into schedule as well. I could even go back into forms if I wanted to as well. Or I could come back into my schedule and go, okay, well, I want to see the window installation was, due on the 15th of September. Was it finished by the 16th of September, for example? I can come in here, I can go, okay, well, there's the window installation documents. There's the asset document that actually relates to that particular window installation. And I can even see the window schedule or window drawings that I need to. So all of these links have been built in to the platform itself because I just linked it in a single location. And again, if I click into this asset for the windows, for example, it's going to bring me into the assets element for that specific set of windows or whatever that asset numbering system is that I'm using. And again, I'm in a different asset here for a moment. I was in unit 001. It's brought me into this window particular asset here. I can see this has a number of references with it. So again, the platform builds all of these links to the various different areas within inside Autodesk Build, allowing you to manage that on site potentially. So to kind of pull that back a bit, and I know we've just looked at a user interface and those type of connections, but let's say for site, for example, we're on site, perhaps we go into a room. I get this as a photograph. We go into a room on a site and there's a barcode on the wall. So effectively what we can actually do is, and I'm going to share my phone screen for a moment. What I'm going to do is, if it will allow me, a moment. So what it'll allow me to do is actually connect my phone screen, if it will allow me. It won't because I'm on a different Wi-Fi network, so I'll just leave that for a moment. So what I can do on the mobile device is I can pull up what's called the Plan Grid app, which is the Autodesk Build app. It's known as Plan Grid in your Apple stores or Play Store. So what that allows me to do is actually scan this barcode in a room effectively on a mobile device. When I scan that barcode on the mobile device, what it's going to bring up for me is all of this asset information effectively. You can see I have the barcode number in there. I generated a free barcode on site. And this particular one is related to an individual unit. I can then come into this unit while I'm on the mobile device and I can go, okay, well, what type of checklist do I have to complete for this particular unit for it to be complete? And before I get into that for a moment, what I can see here is I have different statuses. So I built some custom statuses like BCAR incomplete, BCAR complete, or critical fail, for example. So currently it's BCAR incomplete. Maybe I'm project manager or document manager checking this back in site. And I go, okay, I want to see unit 001. Why is it not complete? So I can come in here, I can see all the references. But what I can also do before I go into that is I can also generate a report of that as well. So I can immediately generate a report. I'll show you that for a moment. I could come into the assets, for example. I come into the assets and go, okay, well, I want to see a report on unit 001 or unit 1 to 10 or whatever the case is. I can select that object and I can go, okay, well, I want to export that. Export is another name for a report, by the way, in the platform. I can export that. What that's going to export is my unit 001 asset, the status of it, and all of those linked references. So all of those forms, any issues, any photographs associated with it. I just press export PDF or CSV. I run that report, and luckily I have one I prepared earlier here. So I can come into my asset detail here, come into that particular report that I want to look at. And this is that report that was generated. I ran it earlier. Just for unit 001, it creates a hyperlink for that, by the way, and it's going to show me all of that connected information, all of those forms, the status of that particular asset as well, which is that apartment. It shows me any files associated with it, which in this case is a CAD file. I could click on that CAD file, it will bring me back to the platform, for example, and it shows me these other forms that are connected to that particular unit as well. And I can see here, these forms are submitted, these forms are submitted, but there's also a draft form. So maybe that form needs to be completed. So it's identifying to me, that's why it's not BCAR complete. I also have an open issue as part of that as well. So maybe an NCR or a non-conformance that has happened on site that hasn't been resolved. So that's stopping us from a quality perspective or from a BCAR perspective. It's stopping us from changing the status of this form as well. So I'm in control of that status. And I can see any photographs that are also associated with that same unit asset. And again, I can see that schedule item in this report. So this is just a PDF report. It can get emailed out to any kind of design team members, external members, whoever needs to see this report. But if you have access to Autodesk Build, and if I open up this report and go, okay, well, there's that form, I can click on this URL link. And what it will actually do is it will bring me back into the platform and it will bring me back into that incomplete list. So as part of this incomplete list, it hasn't yet been submitted because the window installation perhaps hasn't been completed. I can either discard this form or I can go, okay, well, actually it has been completed and I can finish off the type of information that's required there. This form that I'm now filling out, I built this in the form builder just to explain. So I can associate various different information with it, like the photographs I look at as well. I can choose any of those type of photographs that are linked or need to be associated with that form, for example. I can put in the height of the door handle or window handle if that needs to go in, escapable width, any damage, I can say no. I can say add signature, I could raise signature, I could raise issues. Just doing that on my mouse, excuse it. I'm going to press submit on that. Now that form will be completed. I'm going to submit that form and I can actually come back into my assets environment. So if I come back into my assets, for example, it's going to come back into my assets. It's going to look at that form that's completed. Let's give that a moment. Go back into unit 001, go back into my references, and what I'll see is that particular form, the window installation one, has now been completed from the one that I just submitted as well. I also see a fire safety one that I need to address. I'll leave that for the moment. Let's say I'm happy with that BCAR unit or that BCAR completion is complete. We have all of our associated information. All of the required checklists are in there. I can even check further checklists if I want to as well. I can even check this non-conformance that happens. I can click onto that. I go, okay, well, why did this person not address that particular non-conformance on site? I can open up that non-conformance and I can clarify, okay, well, what was the comment? There was no comments. There was just a minor issue raised, any other associated information. I can see the relevant people. This person, Nathan Orr, was involved. I go, okay, I know that that's been addressed, for example, or I can send a comment to say, why is this not addressed? And again, you can see the associated information with inside that issue, even though it's in a different part of the platform, it still connects into that asset information. I'm going to go, okay, well, that's open, or that's a closed item. We're happy that that's been addressed. I'm going to come back into my assets now. Just going to go back into my unit 001. That issue will now have been closed. I'm going to go to unit 001, go into my references. I can see that issue has now been closed. So because I went into issues, again, that's another connected piece of information. I can go, okay, that B card is now complete. I'm happy with that. The status of that changes. I can now generate a report. Again, I can select that item. I can even select multiple items if I want to, export that to a report and go through the same process on site as well, using the mobile device to capture the associated photographs, to complete the relevant forms, and then even change the status of those particular assets as well. So that's it from me. Happy to take any questions or hand back over to yourself, Alan.
Thanks, Jonathan. As usual, super presentation. You know, a lot of this software is in front of us, and perhaps there's components of it that we don't quite know how to use. So that was a great insight there. I know we have a common type of question there. I suppose I think it was Dan. Question for you, Kieran. And by the way, apologies for pronouncing your company product incorrectly. I think I said Chiron, it's Chiron. So apologies for that. Kieran, do you use any global standards for like GS1 to ensure that your IDs on your ID or your 2D barcoded tags, you know, when scanning?
Yeah, we don't own the software. The software company that supplies us with the main type of software systems that we use, particularly on the big projects, yes, use those standards for their barcode. They generate the barcodes off the software systems, and we use them throughout the life cycle of the project to those standards. Yes.
Okay. So, notwithstanding the fact that you're focusing primarily on pharma and semiconductor facilities, yeah.
Yep.
I still assume that those clients and consultants and contractors are required to comply with BCAR.
Oh, absolutely. So BCAR forms a major part of the overall requirements and handover to the client. It is separate to what we do. We don't do BCAR. We purely work on a commissioning perspective, but it does form part of the overall delivery package to the client.
Well, I mean, if you take what BCAR is and the, you know, the self-certification, I mean, what you're doing is you're reporting on the safety of the system, no?
Absolutely, yeah. BCAR absolutely captures all of that, and the required documentation from each of the contractors to deliver their part of the documentation required for the safety aspect. Yes.
Do the other contractors in the supply chain on these projects use your product as well, or is it just?
Yeah, most of it's mandated by the client to use the same product. If we don't use the same product, we end up with inconsistencies, and then we also need to end up using APIs to extract information from other software, and sometimes that doesn't work too well. So it's mostly mandated by the client.
Yeah. And my last question to you: is your software available as a SaaS solution, or is it?
Yes.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. So pay as you go. Okay, thanks very much, Kieran. And I know you mentioned drawings earlier, and I suppose drawings are still in the industry, but then you did come on to BIM and digital twin. So that's really where we're going, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So it works both ways. There's the 2D drawings and isometric drawings are still in the industry, irrespective of whether we've got BIM. But BIM is definitely where it's all going. Digital twin is definitely where it's all going to end up. We believe we've a bit to go to tie all of it together, to ensure the documentation is all pulled in the correct way.
If instances occur in buildings in the future, you know, there's going to be potential regulations that will help hold people accountable to these things. So we need to have that trace and track.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think, Dan, another question for Jonathan. Jonathan, for you, Jonathan, I suppose it's a similar question. Does Autodesk leverage 2D barcodes out on site? And what is the replacement for BIM 360 ops, as traditionally that solution imported all the information like you described from BIM 360 to the cloud?
Brilliant question. Yeah, it does. So Autodesk Build does support 2D barcode, so you can print out a barcode and you can put it on any object, and the mobile phone will scan it, and it will pull up any of that asset information that I showed. The replacement for BIM 360 Ops, I've never used it myself, but I was familiar with it as a software. There is something called Autodesk Tandem at the moment that it is in beta mode, and there's a lot of that asset import being developed extensively. I think it's free to test at the moment, so it's called Autodesk Tandem, and you can pull in all of your assets and even all of your COBE data as well associated with that, and you can even link it back to Autodesk Construction Cloud as well. So that's being developed extensively, and there is a beta version that you're able to test now.
Okay.
If you want to try that.
Jonathan, thanks for that. Is that the link on your website for Tandem?
It's not. What I'll do is I'll drop it into the chat box now. I'll just make sure it's the right one for you, if that's okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just conscious of the time, and so what I might do is just look to wrap things up and thank our three speakers this afternoon, to Daria, Kieran, and Jonathan, to the CETA team for their efforts. And by the way, I know there's a very small group left here, but if any of you know of people who are looking for, we have a couple of roles in the Alliance that we are currently advertising for, and in the area of social media, project management. So if any of you are interested, give us a shout, or you in your network, let them know. I'm going to bring the event to a close, and as I say, to reiterate our thanks to our sponsors who I mentioned earlier. The next three events, with three more main events. 13th of October, we have the Digital Housing Series, and that will focus on, that's going to focus on the Construct Innovate Centre, the new construction technology centre that has been funded by the government. And so we'll hear more from, in particular, the university, the National University of Galway, at that event, 13th of October. And their plans, 20th of October, we look at automation and robotics and machine learning. And then we end at the year 17th of November, and that's addressing the whole sort of productivity piece on construction sites. So just to thank everyone for their continued support. Thanks, Suzanne. It always amazes me how ladies like Suzanne can multitask, and I don't know how you do it, but full of admiration for you and the team. So let's try and finish the year strong. We have a regional series as well coming up in November. It's a busy space, but we're using our elbows as we go along, so thanks to everyone for your time.
Yeah, thanks everyone, much appreciated.